Hi. So, continuing from our discussion yesterday about getting over our fear of failure and really trying to get going with a weight loss plan, I came up with a strategy or an approach that I think is going to circumvent that fear. And I also think it's got a lot of benefits practically. And so here's what I came up with. Rather than approaching this from the standpoint that I have to start my weight loss journey, I have to come up with a plan, I have to stick with it, I have to lose weight, right? All these, demands that you might place on yourself, which for most people would work fine, but for us may not work so well. Because as soon as we place demands on ourselves to make progress in this area, which is a sore issue for us, there can be that tendency to resist, right? Especially, activating that fear of failure that we have. So here's what I came up with. What you're going to do is you are going to approach this from the viewpoint of an experimenter. You are going to be experimenting and seeing what kinds of strategies seem to work and what kind of strategies don't work so well. You are going to be experimenting with different kinds of plans or different variations of a plan or guidelines. Plan has a connotation that it's so specific. And it doesn't have to be. It can certainly just be guidelines that you develop. I will say, for me, a plan that's very specific always worked well. It's just my personality, right? And we have to work with our personalities. I don't like to guess. I don't like to have vagueness. I like specifics. So for me, a plan was always, very well thought out in terms of, okay, I'm going to do this for lunch, dinner, my snack. This is what I'm doing for my exercise, et cetera, et cetera. But you certainly don't have to do it that way. Regardless, I don't want you to look at this as a plan that's set in stone. Look at this as something that's going to be evolving over time based on the feedback that you get. Okay. So in other words, don't come from the standpoint that I'm starting my weight loss journey and I'm doing this plan and I can't fail. And if I fail, that will be horrible and awful and this and that. You're putting your feelers out. You're going to try some things and you're going to get feedback and you see what works. As a psychologist with a doctoral degree, I had to do what's called a dissertation, which is a lengthy thesis on an experiment or research that I conducted. And so I know a lot about experimentation and research. And one of the things that you have to do before you delve into your research project is you have to do what's called a pilot study. And a pilot study is basically just trying to see and figure out any obstacles that may come up with running this experiment, any kinds of challenges that you might not have foreseen. It's really like kind of, a practice run, if you will. And that's the way I want you to look at this. It's a pilot study. You're just getting feedback in terms of what seems to be good strategies, and good strategies can be evaluated in terms of they're effective, they actually work, they lead to weight loss, and they're easy to implement and don't cause you a lot of discomfort. Right? Those two things are really going to help you decide whether or not you keep a strategy or get rid of it. You could have a strategy that works great, but you hate it and it makes you super uncomfortable. Not good. And then you're going to have a strategy that's very comfortable, but it doesn't work. So we need those two things, those two requirements for whatever you do. So come up with a set of guidelines as, a first run or first attempt with this. Or if you're like me, you can actually come up with a specific plan in terms of about how many calories you're going to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And if you're even more like me, you'd come up with exact, meals that you're going to have. Again, you don't have to do it to that degree. What's most important is that you're trying different strategies. At the end of the day, I always emphasize the lifestyle changes. And the lifestyle changes that we are talking about are healthy ones, right? Whether or not we're increasing exercise or we're eating and making healthier choices regarding our food. And making healthier choices in terms of not overconsumption so that we're controlling portions. Those three should be included in any set of guidelines, in a plan, or with the meals that you create. You should always have those three in mind. Is this a strategy that's helping me burn more calories? Or do I need a strategy to include in this plan that's going to do that? Do I have a strategy in my plan or my guidelines that is going to address portion control? And do I have a strategy that's going to address increasing the healthfulness of my meals? Okay. Once you do start going down this path, and again, this is not your weight loss journey. This is more of like a precursor to it. It's a practice run. Assessment is going to be super important. Some of the assessment is going to be, kind of like subjective in terms of how do I feel on this plan? Am I comfortable? Or how do I feel with these guidelines? Is this painful or is it something I can live with, right? And you can look at each strategy or each guideline and evaluate it as such. And then what you're going to do is you're also going to want to have some very specific objective measures of assessment, such as the weight scale, the tape measure, and maybe you come up with some other assessment tool, such as taking photographs. I think the weight scale and maybe one tape measurement in your problem area, whatever that is, for me, it was always my midsection, is enough to start this off. But you definitely want to set a day and time. The other thing that's critical is, even though this is a practice run, just like when I ran my pilot study, I still had to write it down in terms of what my plan was. So knowing that this was going to change and that I was going to, encounter obstacles and that the final product would be different from my pilot study, I still had to write down a plan so that I knew what the heck I was doing. I want you to write down the plan and be as specific as you need to be. If you're the type that, if the plan is not so specific, then you don't really follow it so well, you kind of loosey-goosey about it, and it gives you an out, right? Because you can kind of be like, well, I never said I couldn't do this or that I needed to do this. And so therefore, I'm, not going to be giving it my old college try. Then you need to be more specific. You know what you need. If being too specific makes you cringe and you rebel and are like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm imprisoning myself with this very specific plan, then that's not good. But whatever you do, whether it's a set of guidelines or a set of strategies or an actual super specific eating plan, write it down and do it for a week. And then at the end of the week, you're going to do your assessment in terms of your weight scale measurement and maybe one body tape measurement around a problematic area of your body. And then you're going to ask yourself, you could use what we use in psychology. We call them SUDs, subjective units of distress. So if I'm trying to evaluate a patient's anxiety level about something, I'll ask them to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how bad it is, right? So 10 being intense anxiety, 1 being like absolutely nothing, the opposite of that, maybe complete euphoria. So on a scale of 1 to 10, you're going to rate yourself and you're going to say, how difficult was that? And again, a 10 being like, it almost impossible. I can't believe I even made it. And 1, like, what plan? What weight loss plan? Like, what are you talking about? That was nothing. Then the other thing I want you to then do is a more detailed assessment in terms of going over your plan and looking at the guidelines or the strategies or the actual specific meals and see what you think worked well in terms of adding to your progress. If you lost weight or you think didn't work well, you think like, well, here's some problem areas I think that resulted in me not losing weight, or didn't work well or worked well in the sense that they were easy, the meals satisfied you, or the exercise program was easy to stick with, it was enjoyable. Really go point by point. And then what you're going to do is you're going to revise it, and you're going to do it the next week with the revised version. Let's not say we're starting our weight loss journey. Let's say we're running a pilot study to eventually build a successful weight loss journey. And so here's the beauty of this. You might call it a game of semantics, but really it's true. We really are testing things out to see what's going to work to develop an ultimate plan, right? But here's the beauty of this. If it doesn't work out, it's just a practice run, right? We don't have much skin in the game. We're just seeing what's going to work and what's not. You're approaching this from the standpoint that you're going to discover that certain things work and certain things don't. You're expecting certain things to not work well, or dare I say, you're expecting the plan to fail you in certain aspects, right? We're also trying to be hopeful and optimistic that some of the plan will benefit you. And the other thing I like about this is we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. So in other words, you may not lose any weight or only a very little amount of weight, but you may be able to say it's these specific guidelines or meals that were the problem. And that's why. And so looking at the plan from that lens, that there's certain things we can extract and take out from it, and therefore increasing the probability that when we do that, it will be even more successful the next week. And so you're not going to really be able to evaluate the plan as 100% fail, because there's going to be certain aspects of it that were very comfortable and certain aspects of it that you think were really good and successful, so that you're not going to look at it and say like, I failed, the plan failed. You're going to look at it and say like, there's certain things that were good and certain things that weren't good. Well, okay, great. Think of the writing process. Remember when you were in college or grad school, you had to write that big paper every now and then for the class? What was the best way of doing that? You start out with an outline, right? Or if you're more like me, you jumped into the draft, but you always at least did a draft, right? And then you would revise and revise and revise. I mean, if you were trying to get a really good grade, that's what you do, right? And so that's what we're doing here. It's just a draft. And the draft is to be looked upon as learning. You are learning right now. You're doing, but this is more focused on learning than doing. You're learning what works for you in terms of strategies that will help you lose weight and strategies that you like and that you can stick with. You're learning. And after you learn so much about what works for you, then you'll move on to your weight loss journey. And guess what? By that point, you probably will have already lost weight In fact, you would have had to have, right? If you've determined certain things to be successful and you revise and revise, keeping those successful elements and getting rid of the unsuccessful elements, you're going to arrive at a plan that's super effective for you. And so think of the confidence when you finally say, all right, now it's for real. Now I'm doing my actual weight loss journey. I've already lost 10 pounds. I've learned what works, and now I'm going to just do that. I think that is an excellent strategy to circumvent our fear of failure, and it's got so many practical benefits. At the end of the day, that's exactly the way you want to approach it as a scientist, learning what works for you and what you're eventually going to stick with. This is Dr. Fields. Let me know in the comments section, for those of you who try this, how it goes.